lecture is titled Endless Forms Most Beautiful. And now
you're going to hear a lot about evolution over the next 2 days. I think you're going to hear a lot of new things about evolution over the next 2 days. I think Dr. Kingsley and I have agreed that perhaps the vast majority of what you hear is not even in textbooks yet. And it's a sign of the vigor of evolutionary science in 2005. But all of this science has deep roots that started in a very dramatic way in the 19th century. And so our discussion of evolution today is going to begin with Charles Darwin. For, as we'll see, his contributions were immense. And they have endured and been expanded upon now for 150 years. And I think his contributions, even scientists don't realize the scope of his work until you actually dig into the many books, the many contributions that he made over a life's work. So in this first lecture, I'm going to tell you about Darwin's key ideas and how he arrived at them. And in the following lectures, Dr. Kingsley and I are going to focus on the expanding understanding of how evolution works. So let's start with Charles Darwin. I'll say perhaps one of the most misunderstood characters in the history of science. And I hope in the next 15 or 20 minutes you're going to gain a better appreciation of just who this person was. Was this greatest of all naturalists always destined for greatness? Hardly. Now, among the high school students here in the audience, how many of you are pondering a medical career of some sort? Show with your hand. A very high percentage, okay. So was Charles Darwin, until he saw surgery for the first time. And surgery in the early 19th century was not the very sterile process that you see on television in 2005. It was a very rapid process because without anesthesia, the idea was to get it over with quickly before the patient objected too strenuously. So Darwin not only wasn't comfortable with surgery, he wasn't comfortable with the sight of blood. He had a fairly queasy stomach. So after 2 years of medical school that he started at age 16, he washed out. And it was clearly not going to be the thing for him. And he changed colleges, and he moved to the University of Cambridge. And he took up some of his passions, which were natural history, beetle collecting, running around the countryside. He was a good shot. He was a good horseman. He enjoyed a lot of hobbies. He was brought up in a fairly wealthy household, the son of a physician. He enjoyed certain advantages. He liked reading. And he read about particularly earlier British naturalists who had explored the tropics. And being in dank, gray. Now, his wealthy father, fearing that his son was amounting to nothing, just enjoying himself and not setting his talents to anything serious, his options were relatively limited in that day and age since he wasn't going to be a physician. And the more respectable option would be, for example, for Charles to join the clergy. And so that's what Darwin's father chose for him, that he would enter divinity school at Cambridge, study divinity, and become, for example, a country parson. And he would be able to then take his natural history pursuits living out in the country sort of as a hobby. So that was the plan. Yes, the clergy. That's where Darwin was headed. But fate intervened. And Darwin, while he was preparing to study divinity, was unexpectedly offered the chance to voyage as a ship's naturalist with the British Navy. Now, being only 22, financially dependent, fresh out of college, he had to ask his dad's permission. And he was turned down. His father had many reasons, and Darwin jotted these reasons down, and this is a copy of that original document of Darwin's notes of his father's objections to this voyage. A little easier to read in this version. So what were his father's objections? Well, that this voyage would be disreputable to his character as a clergyman hereafter, that it was a wild scheme, that they, the Navy, must have offered the job to many others before him, the place of naturalist. This was true. Darwin was not the first choice. Because it was not accepted, there must be something wrong with the vessel or the expedition, that he would never settle down to a steady life hereafter, that his accommodations would be most uncomfortable. This was definitely true. That he, Dr. Darwin, would consider it as again changing his profession. He had switched once from medicine to the clergy. And it would be an utterly useless undertaking. And Darwin in a systematic manner that would sort of be his whole approach to life, not as well as science, but even marriage. He worked on a rebuttal, a point-by-point rebuttal of each of these objections, consulted with his uncle, and was able to finally persuade his father to let him go. So at just age 22, he set off on a voyage that was planned to be a 2-year voyage around the world. It wound up taking 5. So he left England and never saw his family for 5 full years. Most of that time spent on a rickety wooden boat called the HMS Beagle in cramped quarters, experiencing storms at sea, earthquakes in ports, and for Darwin, seasickness for the entire voyage. That queasy stomach haunted him not only from medical school through this voyage, but his entire adult life. So off they went.